This is a CBS News special report. I'm Gayle King here in New York. We're going to take you to Normandy, France this morning, where President Biden is about to speak at one of the most sacred sites connected to D-Day. It's called Pointe du Hoc, located between Utah and Omaha beaches, where tens of thousands of American troops landed 80 years ago this week. A battalion of Army Rangers scaled 100-foot cliffs at this place under withering fire from the German army to gain an important foothold, allowing the invasion of France to succeed. Think about the visuals of that. President Biden will pay tribute to these men in his speech, following the footsteps of President Ronald Reagan, who spoke memorably in the exact same place 40 years ago. Senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is in Normandy. He's traveling with the president. Ed, it's good to see you. You know, I was looking at the Reagan speech, and it's brought to my attention that 40 years ago, some of the Rangers were still there. Of course, as we sit here 80 years from the anniversary, they say none of the Rangers are there on the scene today. What can you tell us? We see President Biden making his way to the podium.
That's right. This is a speech being given at Pointe du Hoc, which is between Omaha and Utah beaches on the sheer cliffs of Normandy. Let's take a listen, Gayle.
Please welcome the 46th President of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
John, how are you? Please sit down. At last, the hour had come. Dawn, 6th of June, 1944. The wind was pounding as it is today, and always has, against these cliffs. 225 American Rangers arrived by ship, jumped into the waves, and stormed the beach. They could see, all they could see was the outline of the shore and the enormity of these cliffs. And I'd like to look, I know I'll get in trouble with the Secret Service if I go to the edge and look over, but think of those cliffs, as my host just showed me. That's what we're standing on top of. They could hear, all they could hear was the crack of bullets hitting ships, sand, rocks, hitting everything. All they knew was time was of the essence. They had only 30 minutes to eliminate the Nazi guns high on this cliff. Guns that could halt the Allied invasion before it even began. But these were American Rangers. They were ready. They ran toward the cliffs, and mines planted on the beach by Field Marshal Rommel exploded around them, but still they kept coming. Gunfire rained above them, but still they kept coming. Nazi grenades thrown from above exploded against the cliffs, but still they kept coming. Within minutes, they reached the base of this cliff. They launched their ladders, their ropes, and grappling hooks, and they began to climb. When the Nazis cut their ladders, the Rangers used the ropes. When the Nazis cut their ropes, the Rangers used their hands. And inch by inch, foot by foot, yard by yard, the Rangers literally clawed their way up this mighty precipice until at last they reached the top. They breached Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and they turned in that one effort the tide of the war that began to save the world. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday I paid my respects at the American Cemetery just a few miles from here, where many of those Rangers who died taking this cliff are buried. I spoke of what the fallen had done to defend freedom. Today, as I look out at this battlefield and all the bunkers and bomb craters that are still surrounded, one thought comes to mind. My God, how did they do it? How were these Americans willing to risk everything, dare everything, and give everything? There were Americans like Sergeant Leonard Lommel from New Jersey. He was one of the first Rangers to jump off his ship and run toward the cliff. He almost was shot right above the hip initially, and wasn't sure, but he was. He kept going. At one point, he was scaling the cliff. Another ranger yelled, "I'm not sure I can make it." And Lomo yelled back with every ounce of strength he had in him, "You've got to hold on." And he did, and they did. Americans like Sergeant Tom Ruggiero from Massachusetts. A German shell hit his boat as he was approaching the shore. Everything exploded. The sergeant was knocked into the freezing water. And as he told it, he began to utter a prayer. "Dear God, don't let me drown. I want to get in and do what I'm here and supposed to do." Americans like Colonel James Rudder, Texas. When the military asked for a battalion for this daring mission, he raised his hand and said, "My Rangers can do the job." He knew their capacity. He knew the strength of their character. A few days after they scaled this cliff, he wrote a condolence letter to a mother of one of the Rangers who gave his life here. And that letter said, "A country must be great to call for the sacrifice of such men. A country must be great to call for the sacrifice of such men." And Americans like John Wardell from New Jersey. John is here. John, we love you, man. Thank you for all you've done. Deserve that and a lot more, John. Just 18 years old, he deployed to this cliff to replace the surviving Rangers on that D-Day invasion. He would go on to fight across France and Germany. In early December 1944, during one of those battles, shrapnel pierced his skull. But by Christmas, he was back, fighting with his unit. And here's what he said about the notes he kept at that time. He said, "Knowing that my buddies and I always looked out for one another. That's why he came back. That's why he fought so hard to get back. He always looked out, and his buddies looked out for one another." We talk about democracy, American democracy. We often talk about the ideals of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What we don't talk about is how hard it is, how many ways we're asked to walk away, how many instincts are to walk away. The most natural instinct is to walk away, to be selfish, to force our will upon others, to seize power, never give up. American democracy asks the hardest of things, to believe that we're part of something bigger than ourselves. So democracy begins with each of us. It begins when one person decides there's something more important than themselves. When they decide the person they're serving alongside of is someone to look after. When they decide the mission matters more than their life. When they decide that their country matters more than they do. That's what the Rangers at Pointe du Hoc did. That's what they decided. That's what every soldier, every Marine who stormed this beaches decided. A feared dictator had conquered a continent, had finally met his match. Because of them, the war turned. They stood against Hitler's aggression. Does anyone doubt that they would want America to stand up against Putin's aggression here in Europe today? They stormed the beaches alongside our allies. Does anyone believe these Rangers would want America to go it alone today? They fought to vanquish a hateful ideology in the 30s and 40s. Does anyone doubt they wouldn't move heaven and earth to vanquish hateful ideologies of today? These Rangers put mission and country above themselves. Does anyone believe they would exact any less from every American today? These Rangers remembered with reverence those who gave their lives in battle. Could they or anyone ever imagine that America would do the same, wouldn't do the same? They believed America was a beacon to the world. I'm certain they believed that it would be that way forever. You know, we stand today, where we stand was not sacred ground on June the 5th. But that's what it became on June the 6th. The Rangers who scaled this cliff didn't know they would change the world, but they did. I've long said that history has shown that ordinary Americans can do extraordinary things when challenged. There's no better example of that in the entire world than right here at Pointe du Hoc. Rangers from farms and cities in every part of America, from homes that didn't know wealth and power. They came to a shoreline that none of them would have picked out on a map. They came to a country many of them had never seen, for a people they had never met. But they came. They did their job. They fulfilled their mission. And they did their duty. They were part of something greater than themselves. They were Americans. I stand here today as the first president to come to Pointe du Hoc when none of those 225 brave men who scaled this cliff on D-Day are still alive. None. But I'm here to tell you that with them gone, the wind we hear coming off this ocean will not fade. It will grow louder as we gather here today. It's not just to honor those who showed such remarkable bravery on that day, June 6, 1944. It's to listen to the echoes of their voices, to hear them, because they are summoning us, and they're summoning us now. They ask us, what will we do? They're not asking us to scale these cliffs, but they're asking us to stay true to what America stands for. They're not asking us to give or risk our lives, but they are asking us to care for others in our country more than ourselves. They're not asking us to do their job. They're asking us to do our job, to protect freedom in our time, to defend democracy, to stand up aggression abroad and at home, to be part of something bigger than ourselves. My fellow Americans, I refuse to believe, I simply refuse to believe that America's greatness is a thing of the past. I still believe there's nothing beyond our capacity in America when we act together. We're the fortunate heirs of a legacy of these heroes, those who scale the cliffs of Pointe du Hoc. But we must also be the keepers of their mission, the keepers of their mission, the bearers of the flame of freedom that they kept burning bright. That is the truest testimonial to their lives. Our actions every day to ensure that our democracy endures and the soul of our nation endures. To come here simply to remember the ghosts of Pointe du Hoc isn't enough. We need to hear them. We have to listen to them. We need to listen to what they had. We need to make a solemn vow to never let them down. God bless the fallen. God bless the brave men who scaled these cliffs. May God protect our troops. God bless America.
Let's bring back Ed O'Keefe who is at Pointe du Hoc. Ed, I think the president painted quite a picture as he took us through that day. You could almost see it, you could feel it, you could hear it, in the pride in which he delivered those remarks, and then he made the pivot to democracy. What was your takeaway as you listened to what he had to say?
Well, first, let's tell you a little more about Private John Wardle there. He's from New Jersey, turning 99 next month. Came ashore on June 16th, 1944, so D-Day plus 10 at the age of 18, and a member of the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Served with Rangers in the Battle of Brest and eventually was wounded in Germany. And is the only World War II-era veteran in attendance today. As you heard the president say, the 225 Army Rangers who scaled this 100-foot cliff are no longer with us. At the end of that mission, of the 225, there were only about 70 to 90 left able to continue in battle, Gayle, a sign of just the sheer sacrifice and brutality of the attack. The president is walking out here. We're just keeping an eye on him as he goes to see if he wants to say anything. Mr. President, what do you think of today's...
It's quite a stunning spot, is it not, sir? Have you ever seen anything like that?
asking if he had anything like that. He says that he'd been here before, but he had never seen anything quite like this. And it is a beautiful day, Gayle. Forgive us for listening to him there for a second. Sheer cliffs, again, 100-foot plus. A beautiful sunny day, a light breeze, not the weather that those that stormed these beaches back in 1944 had. The president wanted to come here today to honor that sacrifice, as Ronald Reagan had before him, as Bill Clinton did as well, to call attention to the fact that he's concerned about, and many other Americans are concerned about, the future of democracy in the United States and around the world. So he's, in essence, trying to summon Americans to remember the sacrifice that happened here and keep that in mind as the nation goes to the election in the coming months.
You know what, Ed? You know what struck me listening to him? I actually got goosebumps listening to the picture that he painted, because for so many people, what he described is like a movie. But this was not a movie. When he said ordinary Americans can do extraordinary things when challenged, he's urging all Americans to stay true to what Americans stand for. Honestly, it gave me goosebumps to listen to the words that he said and what it truly means when we think about what's at stake here.
And, you know, if yesterday's message was designed to criticize and attack what Russia's doing to Ukraine, what the White House had said is they wanted Americans especially to hear what he was saying here today in France. Obviously, the rest of the world hears it as well, but there was a real desire by the president to speak more directly to people back home about his concerns about the future of democracy versus autocracy. We'll see if he did it. But he did it on a beautiful day and continues back to Paris for meetings that continue through the weekend here.
Yes, he did. And a reminder, too, that many of these people, these young men, they were 18, 19, 20 years old. It's staggering to me. Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent, that's Margaret Brennan, joins us now. She's in Washington. Margaret, we know that the president sat down with President Zelensky just this morning. What can you tell us about what came out of that meeting?
Well, Gayle, you heard the president just there connect the dots between what is happening in Europe now, which is in the midst of the largest land war it has experienced since World War II, in Ukraine. President Biden saying those Americans who stormed that beach came on to Omaha Beach. We owe it to them and their sacrifice to, again, defend the democracy, he said, in Ukraine. He said those soldiers today would be standing up to Vladimir Putin. Today in that meeting, President Biden apologized to the president of Ukraine for the very first time in public, saying, we're sorry that it took so long for the United States to approve this latest round of aid. $61 billion American taxpayers have pledged to Ukraine in an emergency bill, 225 handed over today in the form of artillery, other weaponry, personnel carriers, so that Ukraine can turn the tide, Gayle, because in that 6-month delay President Biden referred to, Ukraine is a bit on the back foot as it tries to defend towns along the eastern side of the country in the face of that Russian aggression. And, Gayle, I'm sure you saw that touching moment yesterday between a World War II vet and President Zelensky himself, saying, you're the hero of the people. President Zelensky said, no, you saved Europe. So it's not just President Biden drawing those connections between the dangerous moment we're in now and what happened back in 1944.
I did see that moment, Margaret, and there is so much at stake. Thank you so much. Our coverage of the D-Day anniversary will continue on CBS News 24/7, on your local news, and, of course, tonight on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell. Many of you now will return to CBS Mornings, but you should know this has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Gayle King, CBS News here in New York.